Mr. Mayor, you are now live.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a few minutes after 4 o'clock. Sorry for the delay. We had a few technical issues to sort out. Welcome to the joint council meeting between a joint special council meeting involving both the municipality of North Cowichan and the city of Duncan. Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge, as always, that we're gathered on the traditional ancestral territories of Coast Salish First Nations, in particular and primarily Cowichan Nation. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order in terms of the municipality of North Cowichan, and I would turn to my colleague from the city of Duncan to do the same for the city of Duncan council meeting. Mayor Staples.
Okay, I'd like to call for the meeting to come to order. I can introduce my members of council that are here today. We have Councillor Brooke. We have in person, we have Councillor Newington and Councillor Duncan and Councillor Bruce. And online we have Councillor Capps, and I believe Councillor Minimus was unable to join us this afternoon. Thank you for hosting today's meeting.
And thank you very much. This is always a bit awkward, these meetings. We found in the past that we would hold joint meetings and the host municipality would keep the minutes and conduct the proceedings, and the guest municipality was kind of there to provide input, but there was really no record for them. So what we did early in this term was we said if it's a joint meeting, we're going to run 2 meetings concurrently. So you'll see that there are motions made that only North Cowichan councillors can vote on, and then mirror motions made by the city of Duncan. And the reason we do it that way is to preclude the notion of, we make a motion and then, or Duncan makes a motion and it comes back to North Cowichan Council, and some of the councillors here go, well, I'd like to amend it. Then it would have to go back to Duncan for ratification again. We ran into some of that in the amalgamation discussion about 5 years ago. So to alleviate that, we're saying we do everything on the spot here. Any amendments and stuff are debated by both councils and then adopted. So with that, in terms of our council, we have with us today Councillor Sari, Councillor Manhas, and virtually we have Justice Marsh and Toporowski. So welcome to everyone for the meeting.
Hey, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I'm here as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I scratched you off the in-person, but okay. Councillor Douglas is here as well, just in case anybody missed that, including me. With that, we have an agenda before us, and assuming there's no late items from North Cowichan Council, I would invite a motion to approve the agenda as circulated in North Cowichan. That's moved and seconded. North Cowichan Council in favor, everybody? Thank you. Mayor Staples.
Thank you. And I would like to do the same for Duncan, that the joint council agenda between the city and the municipality be approved as circulated. All those in favor? All right. Thank you. Back to you.
Right. We have some minutes that North Cowichan has to adopt. Apparently, Duncan already previously adopted those minutes. These are the minutes of the last joint meeting we had, September 20th of 2021. Can I have a motion to adopt those minutes as circulated from North Cowichan? Thank you very much. All in favor and opposed? That carries. It's our practice at North Cowichan to invite public input at this stage of our meeting, so we're going to do that. It's an opportunity for the public to provide feedback on matters included on the agenda. There's a maximum 3-minute time limit here. We have a few people in the gallery. Are you folks interested in providing input? Seeing nodding, you are. Come on up to the microphone, ma'am. And please state your name and the agenda item you wish to speak to, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, my name is Lynn Drake. I am interested in the RVs, the second thing on the agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
I think the city needs to differentiate between people that live in RVs and people that cause problems. There's no need to monitor or hassle folks that aren't causing any problems. If folks are sleeping in their vehicles, they are by the definition of sleeping, not causing any problems. If they are littering or drunk or loud or etc., then you should deal with the behaviors of those people, not the people for being attached to an RV. You need to deal appropriately with any poor behaviors, regardless of what vehicle that person is attached to. When I read the agenda, they suggested that it would be a problem that the city that would then have to provide garbages and washrooms. Please don't use this as an excuse. There's lots of RVers out there that are fully contained, and there's lots of public washrooms, and there's lots of ways to dispose of garbage. I suggest that you embrace RVers like the city of Chemainus. They have a big RV parking area. In San Francisco even. I was there this winter, and you can park anywhere on the streets there without a problem. The majority of RVers spend lots of money, they fill jobs, and they don't cause problems. The majority of them don't cause problems. If you can't embrace the idea of RVers, I think the second choice would be to go complaint-driven. And again, just because a person is attached to an RV doesn't mean they're going to cause problems.
Thank you very much for your input.
Okay.
And just for the record, I know in both Duncan and North Cowichan, enforcement is always complaint-driven. That's generally how we do it. So, but thank you for the
It just sounded like from the submissions that there's going to be a change in that.
The report that is before us today is here for information. It just provides a bit of an overview of what's going on. There's no recommendations to make any changes.
Okay. So does that mean once you get more information, you're not going to make changes?
Mayor Staples, it's your report.
It's for us to just bring up the question, to have a discussion with our two councils about how we may proceed with this conversation moving forward.
Okay.
That's what it is, because it's people have been asking us about RVs because our jurisdictions are so close. It's a conversation it's best for us to have together. Mm-hmm. This is just for information to sort of start to put it in our minds so that we can begin having conversations, not to begin to penalize people or to do anything other than what is happening at this point in time, which is complaint driven. Okay. It's simply because it needs to be a discussion. I get phone calls all the time. I don't know if Mayor Sebring does, about people wanting to have people RVs in their yards to do different things, but we don't currently have any sort of policies to support those things. So it's just to put that conversation and get it started. So that's what this forum is for.
Okay. So if it's more about RVs and yards and storage and stuff like that, again, just because it's an oversized vehicle, if it looks bad, if it's, if there's something wrong with it, if it's bringing down property values, then those, seems to me, should be on a individual basis, not a blanket statement.
Yeah, it is. This is just for us to have a conversation about, we're not being prescriptive about what we might do. It's just to start having a conversation.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would turn to IT. Do we have anyone here virtually to address the public input portion of the agenda?
We do not.
Thank you very much. That takes us to item 5 on the agenda, which is our business. The first 3 items are reports generated by the City of Duncan, so I will turn it over to Mayor Staples to introduce these particular issues and sort of lead the discussion. Mayor Staples.
Thank you very much. And it's on our transportation and mobility strategy. And we're going to be having a presentation from Dan Casey and Owen Seifert from Urban Systems. And I believe that they must be online.
And just for the information of the Duncan councillors attending remotely, it's our practice here for everybody but the presenters to turn their video off during presentations and to hold our questions until the end of the presentation to just, A, it preserves bandwidth, and B, it seems to promote a better flow in the meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Casey and Mr. Seifert. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Your Worships. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to share my screen here and just walk through about a 8 to 10 minutes presentation and overview for the group. Okay, can we see my title slide?
We can see you, sir. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Okay, My name is Dan Casey. I'm a transportation planner with Urban Systems. We're the firm that's been contracted by the city of Duncan to develop the city's transportation and mobility strategy. Spend just a couple minutes going over progress on the TMS and what the next steps might be. So I wanted to highlight first that this has been a very integrated and coordinated process. The TMS has been developed alongside the official community plan review, which is nearing completion. It's also been developed in collaboration with some of the ongoing regional initiatives. So initiatives of North Cowichan, of Cowichan tribes, of the regional district, as well as past work on corridor management undertaken by the Ministry of Transportation. So a lot of previously established directions and collaboration between the various organizations behind the TMS. The process we've undertaken has been generally a 4-phase process that launched back in 2021. Through the summer and into the fall of 2021, we undertook research and analysis to better understand the community and some of the transportation behaviors. And that work was summarized in a working paper number 1 that we were here last fall and presented on some of the key findings from that work. Phase 3, we're nearing the end of right now, which is around establishing the key directions for the strategy, and that is culminating in this working paper that I believe was included in your agenda package. And then the final phase will be developing the final strategy document itself. So I wanted to touch on the TMS framework. So these are sort of the vision, goals, and principles and overriding directions that guide the work, the more detailed work that's contained in the working paper and the TMS document, and which will guide some of the implementation of this document moving forward. And so this on the screen in front of us is the vision statement. I won't go word for word, but really the focus of this vision statement is around supporting mobility for all, creating a transportation network that is enjoyable and functional, emphasis on supporting a shift toward active and sustainable transportation. And a real key theme is around supporting mobility for people of all ages and abilities, providing safety, convenience, and access. Six distinct goals were established to guide the work that was undertaken. Some of those include building upon Duncan's unique existing character around connectivity, both connectivity within Duncan itself, as well as connections to neighboring communities, and around collaboration, working with various levels of government and community organizations to see this plan through and through implementation. And then key principles also to guide the work. And a few of them that were really key themes throughout this process were around all ages and abilities, or AAA. The idea being that if you create a transportation network and a mobility system that works for the young and the old, and folks that might have, say, limited mobility capabilities, it's going to work for the rest of the population as well. And so really this idea that all ages and abilities planning is just good planning. Another key principle is around complete streets. And so identifying that streets as public spaces, so not simply corridors to move vehicles, but they are public spaces and provide an opportunity for the city to achieve more than simply moving vehicles, whether that's multimodal transportation, active transportation, public transit, et cetera, and even moving beyond that to help address some of the city's key environmental objectives and supporting healthy, prosperous public realms as examples. We've undertaken a 2-phase public engagement process in undertaking this work. That involved a number of different activities to outreach to different portions of the population. It also involved targeted conversations with stakeholder agencies. Some of the key things we heard through that process, we found of the 6 goals that I mentioned, collaboration, design, and strategic investment were seen as the most important goals. Touched on this idea of complete streets and all ages and abilities. Those were the principles that seemed to resonate with the population the greatest. And then we did hear and we saw that pedestrian safety and cyclist safety our key priorities in terms of what the Duncan community would like to see in terms of prioritizing investment and focus. So I want to turn now to the long-term networks. So these networks have been developed to identify what, they go mode by mode, and they identify what the transportation network will look like at full build-out. And so the idea is there's, an existing condition, the current state and the way it is right now. These long-term networks are meant to be the roadmap, we'll say, to make sure that investment and improvements made along the way are consistent with what we want to see that long-term network to look like. So first, the walking and rolling network. What we're looking at in front of us is a network with the solid blue lines indicating the location of existing sidewalks, dashed yellow lines, the proposed locations for future sidewalks. We've also got pathways and walking trails identified on here in green and gray as well. And importantly, we wanted to highlight, and the stars are meant to indicate this, is the key connecting points into between Duncan and North Cowichan. They're not all of them, but some of the key ones. So Government Street, Cowichan Lake Road, along Canada Ave and at Beverly, along the highway, and then to the east where Trunk Road and Zuhalem connect. So really wanted to show how those connecting points between the two municipalities play their part as part of the overall network. Number two is around cycling. You'll notice here solid lines indicate the presence of existing facilities. Dash lines, the location for proposed future facilities. And then importantly, there are different cycling facility types, ranging from protected bike lanes to painted bike lanes to shared bikeways, these being quiet, slow residential streets, safe for shared cycling, as well as pathways. And so again, highlighting some of the key connecting points between North Cowichan and Duncan with the stars, indicating how some of the work that North Cowichan is undertaking on their own transportation network planning might link into planned facilities within Duncan. Third, public transit. And so the approach that's been taken to the long-range planning around public transit is rather than a focus on routes and service planning, it's been a focus on infrastructure, which the city has direct control over. And so the imagery on the screen is showing the presence of existing bus stop locations and bus stop amenities. And the plan, the TMS, is working through a process of identifying highest priority bus stop locations for infrastructure improvement, whether that be accessibility improvements, improving ability to get to the bus stops themselves, or whether it's amenities at those stops, shelters, benches, garbage bins, etc. Then lastly, the complete streets network. What we're looking at here is the city's road network. It shows obviously the highway and the thick red line. It shows major streets, so our biggest municipal streets in blue, generally government, Trunk in Canada. Connector streets are the roads that are meant to collect up local trips and distribute them to the more major roads. And then finally, local streets. And so part of this process has included a fairly extensive traffic analysis and modeling exercise. And that'll be used to determine how these streets are functioning, whether they're functioning as intended per the classification that we're looking at on the screen in front of us, and also where intersection improvements might be needed, either to address deteriorating traffic conditions and or to support safety objectives at specified locations. So I wanted to wrap up with next steps. We're here today. We'll be looking through the summer to wrap up this working paper number 2 that's currently in your agenda package as draft. Working through the summer then to develop the draft transportation mobility strategy. There'll be some community outreach through the late summer, early fall, and we'll be looking to wrap up this initiative come fall of later this year. So with that, I'll conclude and available here for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. If we could take the PowerPoint down, because as it is right now, the chairs can't see. Oh, okay, there we are. Thank you for the report. Very enlightening. Mayor Staples, I'll turn it over to you because, as I said, this is your report and certainly take names of whoever wants to speak, including my councillors. Go ahead.
You want me to do both?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. Is there anyone that has any questions or would like to add anything from either council? I see Councillor Douglas's hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Staples. A question through you to Mr. Casey. Actually, a couple questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So one is in terms of the future projects, you note a few of them in there that tie directly to the Trans-Canada Highway Corridor Management Plan developed jointly between our municipalities in 2014. And so one of the projects in that corridor management plan, which you reference in the TMS, is the new connection from Price Road, which I guess runs all the way to Dingwall eventually. And I was wondering if you had a sense of what the timeline might be on that project. And then the second question, you want to answer that one first, or do you want me to just get both of them in real quick?
Through the chair, I'm happy to receive the questions any way you'd like. I'm jotting notes here, so
sure. Maybe I'll just work through the second one real quick because this one's related. It's the so in that Trans-Canada Highway Corridor Management Plan, it identifies a multi-use path running from I guess Cowichan Tribes land at Boys Road all the way north to Beverly Street on the east side of the Trans-Canada Highway. And as you note in your presentation and the report, a portion of that from the Dyke Trail all the way to, I guess, York would be within City of Duncan's boundaries. And one part I'm not clear on that is that project something that Duncan and North Cowichan can really advance on our own, or does that really depend on Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure? So
yeah,
great. Yeah, so that's it. Those are my two questions.
Great, and those are excellent questions, and happy to provide any insights I can here. And on the second one there, if I might defer to Duncan staff too, if there's anything to add. But I think your first one around the timing of when that Price Place connection might occur. So you're right, it has been identified in the Duncan TMS as a desired street connection. There, as I understand it, the ultimate timing is likely dependent on development potential in the area. And so that might come quickly or more slowly depending on how those applications progress. But we do have it included in the long-term network plan, and we do have associated improvements, including intersection improvement at Cowichan Way on the highway as a shorter-term desired improvement, so plus or minus the first 10 years of the life of this plan. So not to say that will drive the exact timing of the Price Place connection, but it's meant to be associated with it. I think your second question was around the multi-use pathway that's been historically planned for the east side of the highway through Duncan and into North Cowichan. That has been identified in the network planning, again, as a priority project of a 10-year desired build-out for that. And so in terms of jurisdiction, that would lie within a provincial Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure corridor. And so that would ultimately be a project of theirs, but something that both local municipalities could advocate for and potentially support with funding as well.
Thank you. I believe Mr. DeVerte may have something to add to that.
Thank you, Mayor Staples, and thank you, Dan, for speaking to that. The two-prong, the Price Place connection that Councillor Douglas was asking about, we have been in discussions with property owners along that southern piece of that Price Place connection, and we have made one purchase a number of years ago so there is a road connection off of the highway in and around Elwilson Grove. But as Dan mentioned, it will be redevelopment driven through that, and really what we're just trying to do is accommodate off highway connections as much as possible to reduce traffic through the corridor. And as for timing on the multi-use pathway as well, as Mr. Conway will speak to in his report later in the agenda. It's a bit piecemeal as we work our way through different sections. Easier ones obviously come first. I know North Cowichan's done some work north of James up to Beverly, and we have later this year on our project list that will be going to tender soon from the along in front of the Ramada and down towards the Silver Ridge. And the middle section is going to be much more challenging and perhaps come through redevelopment or narrower connections in the interim until we can improve that along the way. I think that answers the questions for the most part, but happy to answer another if I've missed it.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, and welcome, Duncan City Council. Nice to see you all. I have a question, but first of all, I just wanted to express my gratitude for the groups that you included in your initial going out to get input. That it was very fulsome, and it was really good to see. And I'm thrilled with the mobility hierarchy. I'd never seen that before. Sort of like I'm thinking I want to play around with how does that fit Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I do have a question about Boys Road, and I'm not sure if Mr. Pite might be the person to answer, but about 5 years ago, I believe Mayor Staples was there as well. There was a workshop, sort of a thing where a bunch of youth met at Mellor Hall and they came up with plans. And one of the plans included some connectivity and safety on Boys Road for the people who live down there and have to come up. They cycle or walk to get to town and they have to go along the highway. So I don't know, Mayor Staples, who you would have to answer, but I think it's probably North Cowichan, really, because I think Boys Road is in North Cowichan. So I'm wondering if those young people who are now probably parents, because it was 5 years ago, I wonder if their ideas are going to be incorporated in this and how, and yeah, that's basically my question.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. I'll take this one, and I'm sure our staff, I'm not sure if Mr. Conway is here. You know, part of the ongoing delay, it's in our long-term plan in North Cowichan, but part of this has to do with the JUB outfall relocation. We don't want to have to pave things twice, and you know, it keeps sort of getting put off until we finalize some of those plans, is my understanding. And I don't know if Mr. Conway's in the room, or perhaps Mr. Swaby can comment from a North Cowichan staffing perspective. Mr. Conway.
Mr. DeHoop is here as well. Oh, I see Mr. Conway as well.
All right.
Thank you. The mayor is correct that delays on work on Boys Road are related to the extent of works that would be required for relocation of the large pipeline from the lagoons that may take that Boys Road route as one of the options that's still being reviewed.
So could I have a follow-up, Madam Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that really hit me in the gut and the heart about that presentation on Boys Road was the safety issue of young people and elders with walkers, etc., trying to get to town. And I'm just wondering, given a spirit of in it, we're trying to do some reconciliation, if you have an idea, Mr. Conway, of what the cost would be to have that partially done for safety in the interim, because it seems like the JUB is a way off.
Very good question. I do not have a cost at my fingertips. I'm not sure if one of my colleagues has that, but it is something that could be looked at in terms of an interim measure.
And then my last one would just be, I wonder if the province would participate, given they're very committed to United Nations Indigenous rights, people's rights, and it's their highway that those folks have to cross to get into, or that they do cross to get into town. I suppose they could go along the highway, but most of the young people cross the highway. So do we need a motion to have staff to check into if MOTI would like to throw in some dollars, or?
How does it work? Because it's our agenda item.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think that we probably have further information. It is much more complicated than just having an interim solution, given that there's many property owners involved in the location of the JUB and not wanting to pull out, wanting to get the pipe in the right place once its location is known. And I know Mr. DeHoop's here, and he might have some more information, but I think it's just one of these works in progresses that is going to take time as we work through with tribes. Tribes is at the table as we work through the location of the outfall.
Mr. DeHoop?
Yes, there are other factors that make this road very complicated because you may notice when you're on that road during a rainy, stormy day that sections of it flood. This road is very flat in elevation from the highway to about a kilometer east. And if we put a sidewalk in, for example, the water would run against the curb, and so you'd need some grade in order to get that to work. And so then the next problem becomes that you have to install catch basins to pick up the water that flows against the curb, which then would go into a storm main, which doesn't currently exist there. And if we had to put in a storm main, then we'd have to put in a pump station to go over the dike. And so there's a lot of complexities around how this would be done, and possibly studies required for floodplain and stormwater management studies for that area.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeHoop, and thank you, Mayor Staples.
Thank you. Just before I move on to Councillor Justice, I just want to add myself in because it's relevant to what we're discussing. This topic has been on conversation in my 11 years on council, and there has still been no movement on that highway by the Ministry of Transportation. We did have a plan between the, I can't see Mr. DeVertai, but between the city, Cowichan tribes and North Cowichan. I believe it was one of the first years that I was elected, around addressing some of those safety issues, particularly around the hotel that's there. And there are a lot of seniors who live in that trailer park there that cannot even get around the poles, and that still has never been addressed. So I do believe I recognize the complexities of that overarching area, but there is a lot of immediate safety concerns, and 11 years since I've been here is not an immediate response by the ministry. So I think that it would be something good for us to continue to bring forward with Cowichan tribes, to have some of those parts addressed as they can be. At least even, some of the things that were suggested were just some moderate expansions just so people can actually move properly. And also that crosswalk there is still a nightmare, and it's still a very dangerous place for people to cross. So I just wanted to add that in as points of concern that I have around that area still that have not been addressed. And we have been to the ministry before, I believe, jointly to have this conversation. So that will be something that the council next will also have to continue, the councils will have to continue pursuing, because we're still haven't gotten any further along, recognizing the complexities of the JUB relocation as sort of a side of that. This is a much longer conversation than just that relocation option. So I'll move to Councillor Justice.
Thank you very much, Mayor Staples. I guess I'm sort of generally curious about sort of thinking about the Trans-Canada Highway and how it functions as a sort of a major barrier. I mean, it's obviously a major divide in the community, and one of the real barriers to entering Duncan from the west and much of the south end of North Cowichan, if you're not in a car. And if I understand the plan correctly, there's a recommendation for future protected bike lanes connecting the community from east to west across the Trans-Canada Highway on both Coronation and Trunk, with enhanced crossings of the Trans-Canada Highway. And I was curious about what such crossings would look like or could be like if they were to be up to the same safety and comfort standards as a protected bike lane. Would they have to go over the highway, or can you build something that's similar to a protected bike lane across the highway in some magical fashion?
Oh, sorry, is that
Yeah.
you, Mr. Casey, or is that someone else?
I'd be happy to respond to that. I love the question and line of thinking. I think you're absolutely right. The highway is a barrier to east-west travel, and when we started out in this process, we really took. I mean, the TMS was undertaken sort of with Duncan as the city of Duncan as the primary focus, but also consideration to what's happening outside the boundaries, and thinking about how along which corridor would it be best suited for a high quality cycling facility, including high quality crossing of the highway. We looked at within city boundaries, Cowichan Way, Trunk Road, and Coronation, and all in some form have been included in the long-term network. But in terms of then which one gets prioritized as the corridor we want to advance first, in conversation with staff and conversation with the community, Coronation Avenue started to make the most sense, both in terms of directness as well as compared to Trunk, at least, a lower volume of traffic. And so we really turn our attention to Coronation, and that's one that's been included in the priority plan for the first 10 years. In terms of what that crossing of the TCH might look like, it's unlikely to be grade separated. It's at grade, and it's done with things like protection on the approach to the intersection. You can do things with cyclist detection for signals. So a cyclist doesn't need to guess as to whether the signal has sensed them or not. A cyclist wouldn't need to wait as a motorist. They would wait in dedicated cycling areas, and then paint and signage treatments through the intersection that alerts motorists to the presence of cyclists. So you don't see this on every corridor. You see these sorts of treatments on your highest priority cycling corridors, and Coronation is the one that's for east-west that's viewed as that through the TMS.
Okay, thank you. Do you know if there are any examples of that, like say in Victoria or Nanaimo or somewhere nearby?
Yeah, similar would be, and it's not quite offering the level of protection we'd like to see, but if you can picture in Victoria, Tillicum Road, where it crosses Trans-Canada Highway and links in with the Galloping Goose, there's some of those elements we'd like to see in place there. I mean, I think others in a slightly more urban context, there's a couple crossings on Mackenzie Avenue as you approach the University of Victoria, and also getting toward downtown Victoria, where some of the major east-west corridors like Fort Street cross major roads like Douglas and Blanchard. So not necessarily highway like this, but very major streets.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question through you to Mr. Casey. In the past, Duncan City Council had a junior council, and one of the projects that they took on was a safe walk map. I was wondering if you were aware of that map, or if that has been forwarded to you as part of the transportation study.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I believe that was included in our background when we set out on this, and seen these in other communities as well, and they can be very helpful, not necessarily in guiding the infrastructure itself, but guiding people on the best routes to take. One thing I would say is those, as best as possible, should be updated over time as new infrastructure is put in place and best routes sort of might change or be added to. It's important that those things remain updated over time.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from any council members? Councillor Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Once again, my pet peeve, of course, is the very low concentration we have on the bypass, and I've got a real hang up on it. And I was just thinking that perhaps we should have strike some kind of a committee or something to lead the charge on the bypass around Duncan, and I know it's a contentious issue, and the last report done in 2014, which is referred to in this report here, which is fine, but it puts it down for sure. It puts it down, and it does not give us the ability to move ahead with any kind of discussion with the provincial government or anything. And when you look at the traffic here now, and probably, I think it's even quite a different scene today than it was in 2014 when that study was done. And I think we're just on the cusp of becoming quite a bit busier for sure. We all know that. We can see that Vancouver Island has been discovered for sure. And I don't know how to do this, but I'm just wondering if there's any appetite for us and perhaps for this report to give us some emphasis to go to the higher governments, and they've got pots of money and they would really like to give us a bunch, and I think we should go after it, and I think we should head the way for the bypass around, and even never mind building it. The planning that goes into it is years and years ahead of us, and there's very little talk on that. I would just like to see us move ahead with something in that development. Thank you.
Mayor Sebring?
Thank you, Mayor Staples. What Councillor Bruce says resonates with me to some degree. We've had the discussion at our council, and you know, the concern was, well, it increases transportation times and GHGs. I would argue that sitting and idling in traffic to get through what should be a 5-minute zip through Duncan that takes you 40 minutes on a busy summer's day is just as bad for the environment as a bypass. I do note, and on page 20 of the paper copy of my agenda, and I don't know what copy it is or what page it is of the Urban Systems Report, and I actually highlighted it here because I thought this might come up. The last paragraph on that page, it says, while a bypass is not a priority in the TMS, the city supports MOTI's long-term planning to identify and preserve a possible bypass alignment in case such a corridor is needed in the future. So it is in the report. It is thought, you know, it is something that Urban Systems is still alive to, and I think it's something that future councils are going to have no choice but to be alive to as the traffic continues. Frankly, Councillor Bruce, I don't think a motion to strike a joint committee would pass my council. So I'm going to caution you not to try to make that motion because it would probably fail. I don't want to prejudge the outcome, but we've had this discussion. I think there's really only two of us that are kind of in support of it, and the rest are going, yeah, probably not. So that's kind of the political context. We'll leave it there. Mayor Staples.
Mr. DeVertai?
Thank you, Mayor Staples. I just wanted to identify for both councils that our council at a recent meeting directed staff to request a meeting with Ministry of Transportation staff to ask a question relating to Councillor Bruce's question about long-term planning for a bypass. So at least to see if that's anywhere on Ministry of Transportation's radar. At least from a identification of the corridor and long-term restriction of land uses through that area. That's something to that effect. Protection of what might be a future corridor at the very least.
Thank you, Mr. DeVertai, for that clarification. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, it's not. It's not a question, but it's an opinion, and I respect Councillor Bruce's thoughts on the matter. However, I think it would be less expensive and more GHG friendly and even lifestyle friendly if we got the train running on the corridor. And I'm very aware that any bypass is going to have to go through the regional district of Glenora, which is relatively, or the area E, which is Glenora area, which is a bunch of farms, and it would take an awful lot of money to purchase land, and it would completely change that community. So I would expect, given the province and the federal government's position on taking action on climate, that would be where we would best focus if we were going to jointly try and do some lobbying. But of course, it would have to take two councils to majorities to agree on that. But that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, Mayor Sabers, just really quickly, and I get a sense we're not going to be voting on whether or not to jointly advocate for a bypass, but I would just, my position on that is I'd be totally against it. I think if you look at the 2014 study on the Trans-Canada Highway Corridor or the 2005 study that was actually done by Urban Systems, they lay out some pretty compelling reasons why a bypass at this stage doesn't make very much sense. And I'd argue that the reasons they cite are as relevant today as they were then, including the environmental impacts, the loss of farmland as it would cut through many ALR properties and other private properties, not to mention through Cowichan tribes land as well. And I'm pretty sure our North Cowichan residents on Maple Bay Road or Lakes or Herd don't want a highway running past their front yard. So I'd totally argue against this. And before we start advocating the province to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a bypass, I'd much rather see us actually implement this Trans-Canada Highway Corridor Management Plan. As we're going to see in Mr. Conway's report further down on the agenda, we've seen very little progress in implementing that plan over the last 8 years, and I'd much rather complete that before we start taking on a expensive and a project like this bypass, which would have all kinds of potentially negative impacts on the community.
Thank you. And there is no motion for this item, so I see no further hands, so we're going to move on to the next item. Thanks everyone for your input, and thank you very much for your presentation and for the work that you've done on this. And we'll move to the regulation of people living in recreational vehicles. And again, the purpose of this is because it has come up in our community. It has come up, I know, at the regional district table as well. And I would imagine at North Cowichan that this is something that is growing in our community. So it's really just to check in with each other, to have a conversation, or not, but to at least bring it to our attention and our awareness that about other places and what they're doing also to address this, so that we can keep an eye on it, and that this is a conversation that's going to have to move forward. And I'm going to look to Ms. McWilliam, who I believe is going to be introducing this further. So I'll pass it over to you, Ms. McWilliam. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Staples. We at City of Duncan received correspondence in April from Minister Simmons of the Duncan United Church asking us to consider the plight of people residing in or temporarily residing in recreational vehicles. And just briefly before we delved into the issue too far, I'd just like to stress that we do not currently have any enforcement action files against any people residing in recreational vehicles within the city. We are, of course, aware that that is likely occurring, and not just in Duncan, but also in neighboring jurisdictions. Partly, of course, because of the escalating affordability crisis that we're experiencing. So we've done a brief search of what other communities are doing to try to regulate these issues. For the most part, they seem to be focusing on temporary worker housing for seasonal workers. Without going too much further into this, I would just also like to point out that we deal with enforcement issues on a complaints basis. We would regulate somebody parking in their recreational vehicle on the street just as long as they're following the posted parking restriction time permits. And then for private property, we don't permit it in our zoning bylaw. And you have before you a recommendation to receive this report, just for information only.
Thank you. Is there anyone from either council that would like to speak to this or has questions? Councillor Manhas, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Staples. Thank you for bringing this forward, and I see this is an issue I know in Chemainus and North Cowichan also. I see RVs parked overnight on the side of the roads sometimes, and different parks, parking lots around town. What I would like to see is a designated lot for RVs overnight stays, just for overnight stays. I think that way you can, like Ms. Drake said earlier in her input, that this way we can also regulate who the troublemakers are, because usually these guys aren't the troublemakers, it's and let's put all these people in one place if possible. That is what I would like to see, especially given the current housing crisis we're in. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Manhas, or Councillor Manhas. Sorry. Any other questions, or Mayor Sebring? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Staples. It's an issue that comes and goes for us, and in the public input we heard reference to how well we do this in Chemainus, which is part of North Cowichan. I guess thank you for that, but it's a difficult issue. We the enforcement is indeed complaint driven, and we were getting some complaints about a year and a half ago. The complaints seem to fall off in the wintertime when there's more of this stuff going on. That's just anecdotally in terms of the number of people who call the mayor. But the complaints tend to increase now as we move into summer and tourist season, because we do have on Croft Street below the Water Wheel Square, we have designated RV parking, and that's designed for tourists. And some of the business community in Chemainus is going, when folks park there 3, 4, or 5 days at a stretch, it takes away the tourist parking, which takes away some of the potential revenue that downtown Chemainus would like to realize from those RVers. Having said that, and I was talking to Robert Barron, the citizen, about this last week. He called me when he saw this report was on the agenda. Generally speaking, and bylaw can correct me if I'm wrong, it is complaint driven, I know that, but we have taken a fairly light touch to this kind of thing in recognition of the housing crisis. There's a difference between people who are living in an RV because they really don't have a choice, and they are, they have jobs, and they're being, for lack of a better term, productive members of society, and I don't mean that pejoratively. There's a difference between that and some of the social disorder that sometimes comes with this. And we haven't seen a lot of that kind of social disorder in the context of RV street parking. And so, as I said to Robert Barron, absent that, we're taking as light a touch as possible to say, really, you should move on after, one night or 2 nights and find another place to park, but we're not banishing them to Nanaimo or doing anything like that. So it's a delicate balancing act for our bylaw enforcement people, but we're very much alive to the multiple realities that are at play in this file, and I think Ms. McWilliams' report also captures some of that quite well. I'm not sure that we in North Cowichan would be prepared to designate areas or to relax our building bylaw and say, well, now you can park an RV in your driveway, because there are logistical issues around the sewage and garbage disposal. Notwithstanding what we heard in public input, the reality is those tanks fill up and they have to be emptied somewhere. I had an RV for a while, and I had a heck of a time finding an RV dump site in the Cowichan Valley. Maybe I wasn't that bright, but I ended up going to River Road and all the way down into Chemainus Gardens, because that was the only one I could find in the north end. And, and that's a private dump site. So it's not as simple as it looks, but we're doing our best. And I guess that's all I'd say in the context of North Cowichan. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I just wanted to mention too that the letter that came from Mr. Simmons was not about us removing or penalizing anyone. It was actually about us trying to find different options of how we can address this. One of the things that that we talked about in conversation was simply looking at what are other ways. There are a number of churches that, you know, could potentially have a certain number of RVs allowed to park there, was one of his suggestions. Working at, you know, at those types of solutions for people, so that people have access to washroom, so that they have access to some basic, you know, basic needs that may not be within the RV that they have, or as Mayor Sebring said, dumping sites, cost of that, all of those things, right, can be challenging for people. So it was really just to put this forward as something that we are going to, as two jurisdictions, but also regionally, have to have further conversation about, you know, I looked to some of the recommendations, but some of the things that the other areas are doing, that they're piloting right now, and those are things that we need to have on our radar. But also, what are some of the other possible solutions, like the one that that Minister Simmons brought up, you know, in terms of looking to churches to perhaps house people overnight. They would, you know, have similar regulations where they would have to go move during the day potentially, or not. Just looking at what is possible and what does that look like in the future. And that's a much bigger conversation than, you know, we'll be having here today. But it's a conversation that we do need to take forward as communities. And so it's really just to bring this because it came to our attention, and to start to thinking about how we can move that conversation ahead. And, you know, we are nearing an election time, so recognizing that this should be a conversation that is part of the, you know, the next 4 years of planning that people do around our tables, because it's not, the situation is not going to decrease. And so we do need to find ways of supporting people to live in different ways. And so we don't need to solve that right now, but we asked to have this brought here so that we could see what other places we're doing and bring it to our attention so that this conversation can move forward. Councillor Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure if there's been a motion moved or not, but I don't think there has. I'd like to move alternate option number 2, that council directs staff to research options for the regulation of people living temporarily in recreational vehicles due to the housing affordability crisis, and report back to both Duncan and North Cowichan councils at a future joint meeting.
Thank you. Is there a seconder from Duncan City Council for that motion? Councillor Newington, thank you. And to the motion on the floor, Councillor Marsh, I believe your hand was up. Sorry, I missed you. Would you like to speak to the motion that's on the floor?
Yeah, I'd love to, actually. I feel like Tom gave me a great segue. I have forwarded to Mr. DeVertai, because I don't know how to forward to your whole council and to our council, and I will to our staff, the Valemount policy. They have a policy they passed last end of July, and it's allowing councils to consider temporary use permits used as short-term residences on residential lots within their village. And they do address some policy around what to do with waste. And when I read it, the first time I read it, and again today, I was also reminded that the province a number of years ago passed legislation allowing for composting toilets. And that might also be an option. And because I don't want to get into the spectrum of people that are forced are not able to find a rental, but I think this is a prime time to do this, because many RVs are those ones that are attached to a vehicle, and gas is so expensive. I was looking at one the other day. I thought, oh great, I can go camping with my dog and I don't have to sleep on the ground. And it's 10 miles to the gallon. And so the prices of these things are just going down, which will make them more affordable for people. And I can just say I think we're all alive to the fact that there are many people living in RVs all across the region, and it deserves a little bit of attention to how to preserve our riparian areas and other things. But I think there is solutions, and I'm excited about the motion, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to vote at the same time as Duncan's allowed to vote. Okay, so that's my input on it. And I've sent it to Mr. DeVertai, and I've sent it to council. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just a point of process. This is a meeting, or this is a motion made by a Duncan City Councillor. So Duncan Council would vote on it. And thank you, Councillor Duncan, for doing that, because you put the workload on this on your staff, not mine. So basically what that means is that we in North Cowichan, if this motion passes, would eagerly await the outcome of the motion that Councillor Duncan has made. If this motion passes, I would then recommend that in the context of North Cowichan Council, we simply receive the report for information as the recommendation that's in the agenda. And I'll leave it at that, Mayor Staples.
Thank you. Is there any further questions or input from anyone? I don't see anyone on the screen. No. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to call the question for City of Duncan Council members. Could you repeat the motion? Would that be you, Ms. McWilliam, that would be repeating the motion?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The motion on the table is that Council directs staff to research options for the regulation of people living temporarily in recreational vehicles due to the housing affordability crisis and report back to both Duncan and North Cowichan Councils at a future joint meeting.
Thank you.
I believe the motion was for the duration of the housing crisis, or was it due to the housing crisis?
Due to.
Due to.
Okay.
It's in the package
Oh,
as an alternate motion. Okay, and seeing no further hands, all those in favor from Duncan City Council? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, that carries unanimously. I'll pass it over to you, Mayor Sebring.
Thank you, Mayor Staples. So then I would entertain a motion from my council that North Cowichan Council receive the report on the regulation of people living temporarily in recreational vehicles from the City of Duncan Director of Corporate Services for information only. Can I have a mover on that one? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Marsh.
Well, I'm just wondering if it would be helpful for Duncan staff and our staff to talk together about solutions rather than putting it all on one.
I don't believe that the motion that was just passed precludes that from happening, and we have pretty good communication between our two staff contingents. I see Mr. Swaby is nodding his head in agreement, so I think that'll happen in the event. So all in favor of the motion? And opposed? That carries. Thank you. Mayor Staples, you have one more on the agenda.
Yes, we do. The complete street, Canada Avenue, complete street from Evans Street to Sherman Road. And Ms. McWilliam, could you please, I believe Mr. Murphy's not here today, was not unable to make it. So speaking to this will be...
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have our Manager of Engineering, John Pite, on the call.
Okay, excellent, John. Sorry, I couldn't see you on the screen. There you are. So welcome, John. If you'd like.
Thank you, Mayor Staples. I'm sitting in for Brian Murphy, as he couldn't make it today. And I'd like to provide an update for the Complete Street project. The City of Duncan Engineering and the North Cowichan Engineering Departments have been working together on this Complete Street project for a number of months now, and along with McElhaney Engineering have come up with a preliminary design indicating the upgrade from Sherman Road over to Beverly following the Complete Street design factors. And in the report, you'll see that we've taken the street and we've utilized the existing Friendship Trail as a multi-purpose pathway for bikes and pedestrians. And we've kept the turning lanes in the street itself, as well as improved the sidewalk, excuse me, on the west side. And the funding, I'm just doing a real short form here, but I'll expand as questions come. The funding is, we've applied for a federal active transportation grant, and it's a significant project cost of touching around $5 million. The eligible project costs are around $3 million, And then there's some ineligible project costs, which include the underground servicing, such as water, storm, catch basins, etc., and the pavement itself, as the active transportation grant application will cover only the sidewalks and the multi-purpose pathway upgrade. So I guess I'll say I've just done a real short form here, but the report itself goes into great detail about the pedestrians having a very safe place to walk, as well as the cyclists. There's a number of features in the design that will slow traffic down and make the road a lot safer than it is, as well as improving it. It notes that there's some ongoing design going on the North Cowichan portion between Phillip and Sherman with respect to the design of the two bridges on each side of the existing RCMP station, as well as noting there's 5 transit stops and that there'll be a number of crossings and traffic calming, speed display signs, curb extensions, etc., to calm traffic, improve the road to make it a nice gateway, and essentially improve it as far as from where it is now. There's also some settling going on the road down by Phillip Street, which is getting worked on again by North Cowichan. And future discussions are going to include the, fingers crossed on the grant. And so we'll see how that comes, the response to our application. If successful, we're looking at a 2024 construction, hopefully. And the costs covered by the grant will not cover the entire cost. So future discussions between our two municipalities, city and the district, will include the discussions around the costs that will have to be covered from each of our capital budgets. So that's about it, I guess, as far as the overview. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Pate. Are there any questions from other council members?
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Douglas, go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor Staples, through you to Mr. Pite. In the designs for Canada Avenue, it shows the multi-use pathway running along the east side of Canada Avenue from the Sherman Road roundabout south. I noticed that there is a reference, like it might be on, I've got a page 98, it talks about a grass or landscape boulevard separating the multi-use path from the roadway. And I'm just wondering if Mr. Pite could maybe elaborate on what we have in mind and what we have in mind there. And I think for me, the one concern would be if it's just a grass boulevard, may not offer people the level of protection that they may want. If you look at the public survey we did for our own master transportation plan, it sounds like City of Duncan, you received similar feedback with your public engagement, is that one of the big barriers to getting people out cycling and walking is not having that physical separation between the pedestrian and cycling uses versus the roadway. And I guess my concern would be if it's just a grass boulevard or even some light landscaping might not be enough, and that perhaps we want to look at either getting street trees in there, which I don't know if there's enough space for that, or potentially bollards or planters or something a bit more significant. But perhaps Mr. Pite, you could elaborate on that a bit.
Sure, it's all to do with space and what's available. I think right now we're looking at keeping it to a minimum within the railway right-of-way, which is where the multi-purpose path is located right now. And I'll suggest that the multi-purpose path has been in use for quite some time now, fairly successfully as far as safety goes. And I think the idea of this plan is to improve that existing path with pavement and some line delineation for cyclists and pedestrians to share, similar to Galloping Goose or something like that. But yeah, I mean, most boulevards that separate sidewalk from curb, generally we do encourage street trees, for sure. And then I think if we identify like pinch points close to, say, intersections, or reach out to, say, fellows like Dan Casey at Urban Systems, as he talked about the approach up to the Trans-Canada Coronation, for instance, for good safety features to protect cyclists. That would definitely be part of the program as we get into the detailed design. This is a pretty early stage overview right now, showing the concept.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Manhas, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Staples. And I just wanted some clarification, Mr. Pite. In the report on the transit, it says there are 5 bus stops on Canada Avenue between Beverly Street and Sherman Road. Are there really? I drive on that road every day, and I don't see 5 bus stops. I can see it further down, maybe James or James from James or whatever, but not from Beverly to Sherman.
Yeah, it could have been Beverly to James, because this plan goes to James. But yeah, I'd have to go out and count them. I'm going by the report, so that's what it says.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'll count them and get back to you. How's that?
Sure, Mr. Pite.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'm just going to add on something that Councillor Douglas brought up, just in terms of and Mr. Pite we're speaking to around what will go in those corridors in terms of plantings. And one of the things that Councillor Newington and I talk often about is pollinators, and including those in everything that we're doing. And if we're creating connectivity for all of us, we should also create connectivity for bees. And if you don't know yet, Duncan is a bee city. We're the only one on Vancouver Island. And so that's also something that we would like to have our staff and others in the community start to look at when we're looking at how we're planting and what we're planting, because it's important for us to do everything that we can to encourage species from here that are very important to us in everything that we're doing and that we're putting into our environment when we're doing these projects. So just wanted to add that. Thank you. And seeing no other hands, I am going to call the question to City of Duncan Council that Council received the July 5th Canada Avenue Complete Street Project Update Report from the City of Duncan, Director of Public Works and Engineering for information only. Do I have a mover, seconder? And is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor from the city? And over to you.
Thank you. And
Thank you, Mr. Pite.
I would entertain the same motion from North Cowichan. I have a mover. And do I have a seconder? Thank you very much. Any discussion on that one? Seeing none, all in favor? And opposed, that also passes North Cowichan Council. One item left on the agenda, and this is one that was proposed by North Cowichan, so with your leave, Madam Mayor, I will take the lead on this one. And
please, I would love nothing more.
Thank you.
Mayor Sebring.
Trans-Canada Highway Corridor Management Plan. This is an update on actions taken related to the Trans-Canada Highway Corridor Management Plan, and again, it's here with a recommendation that councils receive this for information. I would first of all turn to the author of that plan to give us a brief overview. Who put this one together? I'm trying to remember. I read it, but...
Director Conway.
Director Conway. Oh yeah, there we are. Director Conway, are you ready to speak to your report very briefly? Just give us some highlights.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, sir.
This report has been referenced on a number of occasions earlier in this afternoon's meeting. Staff took the time to have a look at some of the background, as many people might not be that familiar with the report. So we did provide a bit of history of it, how it started, how it was integrated at the time with the University Village Local Area Plan, and that it involved the City of Duncan, North Cowichan, Cowichan Tribes, and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. From that report, there was over 50 recommendations between short, medium, and long-term suggestions that were endorsed by councils. Through that endorsement at North Cowichan, there was a report from our planning department recommending 10 short-term actions be taken. And there was also a letter sent to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure with a further recommendation of 13 actions to be taken that the ministry would be largely responsible for in their execution. And so of the 50 odd recommendations from the report, approximately 20 of them were suggested to be short and medium term items through our planning department and through council's endorsement of the report itself. And we then prepared a table identifying those issues that had been accomplished and those that had not. And in the odd case, there was a little bit of an explanation. I do have a correction on table 2. There's section B2 that speaks about split phasing on Trunk Road and Coronation. As I believe it's not split phasing, it does have protected left turns. And the only split phasing signal that we have is at Beverly Street and the TCH as an example within this corridor. So my apologies for that oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Go ahead.
I was going to jump to some of the conclusions on that. And although this recommendation is for information only, there is a suggestion from staff that perhaps council would endorse seeking an update of the corridor plan using information that is more current. However, to do that, it would require budgeting and resources. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Before we open it up to questions, I just want to make an observation and see, Mr. Conway, whether I'm accurate. I mean, when I read through this report, you know, stuff that is done, stuff that has not been done, and there's a substantial number of things that we identified that have not been done. And is it fair, without, you know, casting aspersions or blame, is it fair to say that part of the problem with this whole Trans-Canada Highway Corridor Management Plan is the fact that we need MOTI at the table to pretty much do anything substantial, the things that are identified here, and a lot of it has to do with whether we can convince them to make it a priority?
That really does depend on the actions that are desired. For example, works at North Cowichan took on within the boulevard areas between James Street and Beverly Street were initiated by the municipality and approved by the Ministry of Transportation. We were also fortunate in that particular instance to receive partial funding of the work, in particularly a pullout at the Tim Hortons. So they were an approver, but not necessarily funding the works or taking care of constructing of the works beyond the edge of the travel lanes.
Right. Because, you know, with the new high school coming there, that particular section is going to become even more of a focus, I think, in terms of a need for some of the active transportation, a safe crossing. I saw referenced in here somewhere the notion of a pedestrian overpass, which is still appears to be on the radar. So all those things are I think, still very much in flux, but I'll leave it there. I'm looking for hands. who has questions. Councillor Douglas, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I had a handful of questions here. One just to build on the one you just asked about the pedestrian overpass from, I believe it's from the skateboard park to the Boston Pizza. Mr. Conway, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Conway, could you tell us what the current status of that is and how the construction of the new high school might result in us getting that pedestrian overpass as identified in the highway corridor management plan?
Yes, thank you for the question. Through the mayor to Councillor Douglas. The ministry has taken a look at potential pedestrian overpass locations within that zone between, we'll call it the skate park on one side of the road and the new high school, which would be on the west side of University Way. As of the last meeting that we had a few months ago, they hadn't selected a touchdown point for either terminus of an overpass, but they are continuing with that investigation through a consultant.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask a couple follow-up questions?
Absolutely. I'm not seeing anybody else frantically waving their hands to speak, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, with that highway corridor management plan, obviously a lot of it's North Cowichan and a lot of it's of importance to the city of Duncan as well. But I know Cowichan Tribes has previously expressed interest in it, and obviously with so many of their members living in the Boys Road area, having those connections from Boys to Beverly Street is going to be important for helping many Cowichan Tribes members get around. And I guess my question for Mr. Conway is, has North Cowichan had any recent discussions with Cowichan Tribes about their, I'm assuming, continued interest in seeing this plan implemented as it was envisioned in that plan from 8 years ago?
Thank you again for the question. Through the mayor to Councillor Douglas. Staff at North Cowichan and our consultant working on the master transportation plan have met with Cowichan Tribes Land Group or Land Committee, if I have that right, and I could not pronounce it in Hulkaminam, not to save my life. And then a follow-up meeting with staff members to discuss these issues that were important to Cowichan Tribes, and they were quite specific. Not necessarily relating back to the corridor plan, but certainly the same issues. The crossing of the river, bus transportation is important because of the number of members that do not have access to personal vehicles. So the entire issue about getting into the city proper and moving around from homes to goods and services is of key importance to them. So that includes Boys Road, Trans-Canada Highway through Duncan, Trunk Road, Zuhalem Road, all of those access points and to all of the regular destinations. Very important is what we heard from the Land Committee.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask one more? And then I'm done.
Okay, and then you're done.
All right. Just one quick comment as well, as I can appreciate what Mr. Conway said about potentially updating the plan. It is 8 years old. I guess my one reluctance there would be, and I'm sure our colleagues at City Duncan have gone through this as well, is that we develop so many plans and strategies every year, and it just feels like we spend so much time developing these things, and then 5 years later we're told they're too old and we've got to start over again, and you end up in this endless cycle of planning and strategizing, which is obviously important, but I mean, looking at that highway corridor plan, I think there is a lot of it that's still very much relevant. Mr. Mayor, I guess the last question I had, and it's maybe less for staff and maybe more for everyone else from the two council tables, is like, I've been here 8 years now on council, and I've never, in my experience, seen us advocate for this plan at UBCM, either as North Cowichan or jointly with Duncan or even jointly with Cowichan tribes. And I'm wondering if that's something we may want to consider, because when I look at this list of projects that haven't yet been implemented, I think as you alluded to earlier, Mr. Mayor, a lot of those do rest more squarely on Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure rather than either of the municipalities. And you know, I think we can hope that they're going to follow through with these projects. They did, after all, fund the Highway Corridor Management Plan back in 2014, but without that sustained advocacy from the municipalities year after year, I think it's going to be more challenging to get that provincial funding. And just throwing that out there for an idea with all of you is, do we want to look at advocating to the province for that more attention on this plan, either through UBCM, or, I mean, we all live, you know, like an hour away from Victoria anyway, from the legislative buildings. Maybe we want to consider trying to get a meeting with the transportation minister outside of the UBCM cycle. And I'm saying that recognizing that we've got fall elections coming up. So, you know, further to your earlier point, Mayor Staples, perhaps this is an idea we want to leave for the incoming councils, as there may be some new people around our respective tables.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas, and I take your point. I think we're too late to schedule UBCM meetings with Minister Fleming, but it's never too late to try to set something up, you know, in Victoria. I mean, you know, one of my predecessors in the mayor's chair here was very much of the opinion that we should focus less on ministerial meetings at UBCM and leave those open to the folks from the more far-flung regions of the province who really only have access to cabinet ministers once a year. I have some sympathy with that. Equally, we all know I've tried to set up, or our staff has tried to set up meetings with ministers on certain issues. Some ministers are responsive. Others say, sorry, I only talk to municipalities at UBCM. They don't actually come out and say that, but that seems to be the response. Minister Fleming, in my experience, hasn't been too bad on this one, so it may certainly be something for the next council to consider. Councillor Marsh.
I understand the idea for the next council to consider, but sometimes it takes a while for a council to get its footing. And I'm wondering if this might be something that staff from Lulumoxon, from North Cowichan, from Duncan might set up with Mr. Fleming. And is it Mr. Farnworth that's the Minister of Indigenous Affairs now?
I believe it's Minister Rankin.
Oh, Rankin, that's right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, and then maybe the two mayors and the chief could go down and just kind of remind them that we're trying to work together and we need their help. Because waiting till the next term for something that has been a goal since the beginning of the last term just seems like it could just go on and on and on, just like the Boys Road thing.
I would turn to Mayor Staples and say, can we try to set something up, or ask her? We don't need a motion for that, right? We can just have a discussion.
We can talk about the leadership.
Okay. We'll the two mayors will take this away and we'll have a chat with Chief Whitson next time we connect. So we'll see where we can go with that. Any other hands? I don't see any hands on screen. I don't see any hands in person. So I believe, was there a recommendation here to receive this one for information?
Yes, received the July 5th report.
That council received the July 5th report from North Cowichan's Director of Engineering Projects for information only. Can I have that moved and seconded? Thank you. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Do you want a similar motion for City of Duncan, Mayor Staples? I don't see it on the agenda.
I don't see it on the agenda either. Do we need to do a motion, Ms. McWilliam, for this? I don't see it on the agenda for the city.
Yes, please, Mayor Staples, if you could receive it for information or whatever council's instruction would be.
Okay, so I'll ask for a motion from Duncan City Council to receive this for information. Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Right, there being no new business on the agenda, and since this is a North Cowichan hosted meeting, our meeting order includes question period. So I see we still have somebody in the audience. Do you have any questions based on the discussion that was had today? If you do, please come to the microphone. And while you're on your way, I would ask IT, do we have anybody remotely who has questions?
We will just refresh
sorry,
the feed.
Ms. Fitzgerald?
No, we don't have anyone with their hands raised.
All right, thank you. Proceed, ma'am.
I guess perhaps I came across defensive, and that's the way van lifers have interacted with bylaw, because we feel a bit penalized just for being on this planet, even when we're not causing any trouble.
Your question, do you have one?
So it sounds like you're going to have further discussion. I'm just wondering, is that going to be in a vacuum, or is there going to be input? Is there a way to have input?
Mayor Staples, your staff is putting the report together. I'll turn this one to you.
So, I mean, you're always welcome to send information to the city if you have input. At this point in time, staff will just be gathering information about what's happening in other places and what's going on, and bringing it back for us for discussion, possible recommendations. But there's always room for us to receive information from people who do have thoughts, and there's nothing formal in place in terms of a process other than staff going out to collect information at this time.
Okay, so
but
I looked
you're
on
always welcome to do that.
I looked on Facebook and it said you're not allowed to comment.
But you can send an email to staff. All of the contacts are on the City of Duncan website to send emails, yeah. And those, rather than commenting on social media, particularly if you're sharing ideas and feedback, it's always best to put that in an email.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That concludes the business of today's meeting. So, starting with North Cowichan Council, I would entertain a motion that this special joint council meeting between the City of Duncan and the municipality of North Cowichan be adjourned at 5:35 p.m. That's moved and seconded. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Mayor Staples, I believe you need a mayor motion.
All right. I'm sure that everyone at the City of Duncan would love to spend more time together. It's not often that we get to see each other in person or that we get to visit other places. But for today's purposes, could I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Thank you. And I'd like to thank North Cowichan Mayor and Council and staff for hosting us this evening. It's much appreciated.
Been a good meeting. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.